And now, ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome our host, Senator George Mitchell.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Boy, I've had a lot of introductions in my life. But I've never sweated through one like that one, sitting right next to my wife. I was racking my brain when he's telling this story. It was really terrific, Greg, for you to come, for you to do what you've done, to be such a great leader. It's a special pleasure for me because I've known Greg since he was a young boy. His dad was a prominent physician in Waterville, a great friend of our family, and your generous remarks about me and about our institute represent for us a true validation, and we are deeply grateful to you and Harold, who's no longer with us, but I'm certain, knowing Harold, looking right down and checking everything that's being said here tonight, for the spectacular challenge gift in support of our mission and our vision. You will transform our organization, and it's meaningful for all of the scholars here, and more importantly, for the many future scholars who won't have heard you, may not know about this award, but whose lives will be better and more meaningful because of what you and the Alphon Foundation have done. I knew Harold very well. Several of his children and other relatives have been lifelong friends. They have been truly extraordinary in their devotion to Maine and in their generosity to so many good causes in Maine. So I'd ask you all to join me in thanking Greg and recognizing what is one of the finest and most generous families in Maine's history, the Alphon family. Thank you, Greg. I want to also recognize my wife, Heather, who's here, who has suffered through my many long absences in Northern Ireland and elsewhere with full support and love. Heather, would you please stand, and thank you very much for that. I want to also thank Stuart and Linda Price. Linda is my niece, the daughter of my oldest brother, Paul, and Stuart is her husband. They have been exceptionally generous to us over many years and are again the prime sponsor of this dinner. Thank you very much, Stuart and Linda. As Mary said, this dinner is wholly underwritten by Tom and Linda Walsh. This is the first time they've not been able to make this dinner. I always make a special point of recognizing them. Tom is a lifelong friend and a tremendously generous philanthropist in many ways, mostly non-public. And so I ask you to again join me in thanking Tom and Linda Walsh for their exceptional generosity. I want to thank Brady and Jessica for their comments. I'm going to say something to you that, after listening to them, you will have a hard time believing, but it is true. They are fully representative of the entire group of scholars. As amazing and outstanding, impressive and moving as their comments were, they're not exceptions to the rule, they are the rule. And you can be confident in knowing that your support is going to extraordinary young men and women like these. Jessica, I want to say that you do the Mitchell family an honor by becoming part of our family. We love having you. Thank you, Jessica and Bridget. Now, I always like to tell a few stories at these events. They're very emotional for me, and we always need a little humor. And usually before I speak, I go to the men's room, and I get a lot of advice. I don't really have to go to the bathroom, but I always need a lot of advice. And I found no better repository of wisdom than the guys who gather around out there trying to skip part of the program. So one guy said to me, "You're going to tell that Kissinger story again tonight, aren't you?" And a guy behind him said, no, I've heard that 4 times. He said, "Come up with something new." I said, well, I was in Boston last week, and I told a couple of stories about guys from Boston and Maine, but there isn't anybody from Boston here, so the story doesn't really have a punchline. So he said, well, there's a guy from Boston here. So, where's Mark Crispin and his group from Wyndham Capital? Would you stand up, please, so we can recognize the Bostonians and thank them? Right over here. Stand up, stand up. Okay. So not only are these great guys in supporting our organization, but they give me the prop on which to hang this story. So those of us who are fully acquainted with Maine history know that few people from Massachusetts do know, because they've given a doctored version of history, that Massachusetts once was part of Maine. And I always like to say when I go to Boston that we're very proud of how well they've done since we let them go out on their own. But sometimes they get a little overly impressed with themselves, think they're kind of looking down at us. So I like to tell a couple of stories that make the opposite case. The first one is true, the second one, not really. All of you are familiar with Acadia National Park, and I hope most of you have been there. Those who haven't, you really got to get there sometime. It's a beautiful place, and like most national parks, they have lovely restaurant concessions. The Jordan Pond House is a famous place. Years ago, it burned down, the old building, and just about the time I got in the Senate and I was able to get a little money to help them finish it in the national park, so I went to the weekend opening of the restaurant there. And on the second day, I was to meet a couple of friends. We were going to have lunch, and they have a nice specialty popovers and tea, and you sit outside and look at the beautiful view. But one of the guys was late, so I went out. This is only 20 years ago, but it seems like a couple of centuries because they had payphones then. I went out to go on the payphone to call this friend of mine from Bangor and ask him what time he was coming, and we were late and I had to go. When I got there, there was a guy at the payphone, and he had a card propped up on top of the payphone box with a whole bunch of numbers, and he was pumping quarters into the machine, and it wasn't working, and he was banging it on the side, and he was swearing a blue streak. His wife was standing over by him, and in the course of it, he started making disparaging comments about Maine. A bunch of yokels couldn't even know how to operate a payphone, and he kept pumping and swearing and banging, and pretty soon a guy got behind me in line, and then another and another and another. This went on for several minutes, and the guy behind me tapped me on the shoulder. He said, excuse me, he said, aren't you Senator Mitchell? I said, yes, I am. He said, oh, gosh, I'm very happy to meet you. And he shook my hand. I said, well, where are you from? He said, I'm from Bangor. We started conversing, and the guy kept banging away. The guy who's from Boston and talking about how if this wouldn't happen in Boston, and a bunch of yokels. And so he said, are you here on vacation? I said, yes, I am. I said, how about you? He said, no, I'm working. I said, what do you do? He said, why, I'm a telephone repairman. He said, as soon as that guy from Boston runs out of quarters, I'm going to fix that phone. Yeah. Now, that's a true story. The other one, which isn't much, is a great story. There's these two smart guys from Boston went to MIT. They got engineering degrees, but when they graduated, it was a recession. They couldn't get a job. So they were quite ingenious, so they put their minds together and they built this little machine that produced counterfeit $20 bills. And so they made a nice living. They'd print up bills and then he'd go out and pass them and did pretty well. And then one day the machine malfunctioned and it produced a whole bunch of $18 bills. So the one guy says, well, these are no good, we can't do anything, we got to throw them away. The other guy said, no, wait. He said, I go to Maine in the summer. He said, there's a small town, he said, this country store, this old guy runs it, he doesn't know anything. He said, you give me those $18 bills, I'll pass them up there in Maine. So a couple of months later, he went up way up into eastern Maine, went into this country store, and this old guy, must have been close to 100 there, tending behind the counter, and he said, hey there, old-timer. He said, how you doing? He said, oh, I'm doing fine. He said, I'd like to ask you for a favor. The old man said, well, sure, what is it? He said, our role in life is to please you tourists. He said, especially folks from Massachusetts. The guy said, well, he said, could you break this $18 bill for me? The old man said, no problem. He said, what do you want, 2 9s or 3 6s? Anyway, Mark, thanks a lot for enabling me to tell that story and for all your help in the future. Well, I do want to say some serious words and to begin by saying that in addition to the remarkable gift from the Harrell Foundation, I'd like to acknowledge the fact that many, many generous friends have come together to support this effort. Several are here tonight, others were not able to join us. But all have given generously. And for me and our scholars, this is like Thanksgiving coming early, because we're now very close to meeting our target to enable us to add $10 million to our endowment. That, in turn, will allow us, in the next few years, to get our scholarship grant up to $10,000 per scholar. This is a And so, when I conclude, I'm going to make the traditional closing pitch. But I'd like to ask each of you to think that if you will help us out just a little bit more, your contribution was the one that made the difference. Think of it this way. I remember this in 1941, when the United States House of Representatives voted on President Roosevelt's request for a declaration of war. Most Americans don't realize the vote was 203 to 202. It passed by one vote. After the war ended, each of the 203 claimed to have been the deciding vote. So each of you who makes a contribution can look at Greg Powell right in the eye and say, Greg, I got us over the top. So thank you all very much for what you've done and for what you should do. There are so many people, everyone should be recognized. I can't recognize them all. I do want to recognize just 2 groups. We're honored to have with us outstanding leaders in education from all across Maine. And I'd like to read off their names and affiliations, ask them to stand. Please hold your applause until they're all standing, and then give them a terrific round of applause because they are providing the leadership that enables our scholars to get the kind of education that will allow them to succeed in life. Ron Cantor is the president of Southern Maine Community College. Ron, please stand. Glenn Cummings, the president of the University of Maine at Augusta. Jim Lugos, the president of St. Joseph's College. David Flanagan, the president of the University of Southern Maine. Kate Foster, president of the University of Maine at Farmington. Susan Hunter, president of the University of Maine at Orono. Laurie LaChance, president of Thomas College. James Page, the chancellor of the University of Maine System. And Don Tusky, president of the Maine College of Art. Please join me in thanking and recognizing them. The older I get, the more I realize that the really important things in life are the simplest and those with which we began life. And none is more important than family, and no one has been more blessed than I to have been part of a large, loving, and for me, a truly great family. Many of them are here this evening. You saw on the list of Pioneer sponsors that just about everybody in my family has been hit up for one of these funds. And they've done so with only a minimal squawking and complaining and resisting. And I really do greatly value and appreciate their love and support. And I'd like to ask all the members of my family who are here to please stand and be recognized. I have to say to Jessica that you were kind of lucky. You started at the top when you picked Janet as a member of our family. Janet is my sister-in-law, who's married to my brother Robbie, who's the only member of the family who's no longer with us. So it's an example, Jessica, of your unerring skill that you started right at the top in the family as well as everything. Janet, it's really great to have you here. I want to say a few words tonight about how this program got started and why I believe it's worthy of your continued support. I'm asked often, why is it? How did you go about starting a scholarship program? It began just shortly after I entered the Senate when I was asked to attend a conference at the University of Maine at Orono, the title of which was The Aspirations of Maine Youth. It was, in fact, a deeply disturbing conference, because the gist of it was that the aspirations were relatively low, and the further one got into rural areas and into less economically advantaged areas, the lower the aspirations were. What began as a single speech there grew into an appearance that I made at every high school in Maine. I spoke at the graduation of every single high school in Maine, and to most of them I went back a second and many of them a third time. And there, over the course of my many years in the Senate, I met and talked with thousands of young Maine students. I learned a lot from them, much of it valuable, some of it humorous. For example, the length of every high school graduation ceremony is unrelated to the number of graduates. From a high of several hundred to a low of 3, every ceremony I attended took about 2 hours. I simply got to know a lot more about the 3 than I did about the 200. But I also learned firsthand about the vast financial differences in our state and indeed in our country. I recall vividly 2 graduations I attended on successive days, one June weekend. One was in a rural area of Maine. There were 21 graduates. And when they announced at the ceremony the college graduation awards, they ranged from $25 to $100. Now, that was many years ago, but even then, a $25 college scholarship was astonishing. At best, the recipient could buy a few books. The next day, I attended graduation in the Portland area, in a relatively better-off community, and several awards were in the thousands of dollars. That demonstrated to me that there are vast differences depending upon location. And when I later came to create this, I carried with me the seed of thought that we have to make this available to every child in Maine, that no child should be deprived of opportunity just because of where they happen to live. And there was a personal revelation that perhaps was more meaningful to me. Over and over and over again, I saw in the eyes, I heard in the voices, mirror images of myself at their age. Enough intelligence to show a little promise, but often obscured by anxiety, insecurity, outright fear, and a lot of feigned indifference, like they didn't care when I knew they really did. For a long time, I thought, I can help these kids. And gradually, as I traveled from high school to high school, this took me almost 15 years, my thought changed to, I must help these kids. I came to believe that since I had received so many helping hands in my life, I had a duty, a positive obligation, to try to see that every single child in Maine who wants to go to college has a helping hand and can do so. It is, of course, a huge, perhaps fanciful aspiration, probably will never be achieved in a precise mathematical sense. But I thought just trying to reach that objective, trying to set an objective higher than I know I can ever go, will enable me to do a lot of good. I've done a lot in my life in many parts of the world, but personally and professionally, I've never done anything better or more meaningful than help to create this program. I'm proud of how far we've come and of how far we still have to go. There's a lot of work for all of us to do. When we began, tuition at our flagship university here in Maine was less than $10,000. Today, it's twice that. Maine then, in the year that I attended that conference, Maine had 80,000 manufacturing jobs, a decline of 25% from 20 years before that. And since then, we've gone down even further to about 50,000 manufacturing jobs. The shift from a manufacturing economy to a knowledge-based economy is a fact. It's undeniable. It can't be ignored. We too have changed since our early days. When we began, we had a one-time award of $2,500 administered by the Maine Community Foundation. Today, our award has grown to $7,000. We're a standalone nonprofit organization, and as we said, we're on the verge of going to $10,000. Back then, we offered no support programs, just a check for $2,500. Today, we offer a number of opportunities for our scholars and our alumni, many of which you've heard about tonight, and which address the single most important element, not just in college education, but in life itself. The lack of self-esteem is the single greatest obstacle to success in any endeavor in life. And when you're brought up in poverty, when you lack opportunity, when you lack self-esteem, you can't succeed. And what we try to do is to instill in every one of the young people with which we are affiliated a sense of self-worth, a belief in themselves, the confidence that they can do as well as anybody else anywhere, and they can succeed in life no matter where they go or what they do. And when I meet with these students every August in Maine, my message to them is very simple. There's a lot of negative talk in Maine, a lot of talk about our education system. Whatever may be the case structurally, Maine kids are as good as any kids anywhere in the country or the world. And our task is simply to see that they get the opportunity to permit their talents to flower and to grow. And once they have that, they can succeed wherever they go and whatever they do. The median family income of our scholars is about a third less than the state median family. For many of our scholars' families, indeed for many Maine families, there is no financial safety net of any kind, let alone a nest egg for college. In this context, a scholarship of $7,000 or $10,000, although it may not be all or even a major part of tuition at some colleges, can be a game changer. And we try to make it relevant with mentoring, creating friends, creating lifelong networks, and support systems. The economic benefits of which are not clearly measurable, but are undoubtedly vast. And remember also that the average college graduate today is burdened with student loan debt of nearly $30,000 per student all across the country. That reduces their ability to attend graduate school, to buy a car, to buy a home, to make career decisions with the kind of freedom that they would have if they were debt-free. So we want to reduce that for our wells. But I think the best validation of what we've done comes from the scholars themselves, because they're the ones who know us best. You heard from Jessica, you heard from Brady. Let me just read you a couple of quotes from Ryan Mack, 2006 scholar from Holton High School. The Mitchell Institute has been the single strongest supporter of my education and career. I likely would not have found a path to college or to my intended career without the Institute. From Taylor Bradbury, 2011 scholar from Central Lauristic High School. I'm working hard to get through school, and honestly, the scholarship money has made the difference in my pursuit of a degree. Being part of this organization means to me much more than just the money. They've given me a lot of confidence. So we're trying very hard, we're working hard. Mary mentioned a point, Meg mentioned it also. We found that for young people lacking self-esteem, lacking confidence, lacking financial resources, there is a much higher likelihood of quitting the first time a huge obstacle is encountered. And often they're for reasons that externally seem trivial. And so we created what we call a promise fund, and we provide financial assistance when needed to meet crisis obligations that youngsters didn't anticipate, and for them might make the difference between staying and leaving. So we try hard to figure out their problems, we try to help them with it, and we want to be there in the situation when, for these youngsters, going to college changes from being a stretch to impossible. We want it to get it back to being possible and not a stretch. But we have to continue to help them. And we have to make it possible for future generations to have assistance as well. And that's where you and our other supporters come in. Philanthropy, the generosity of many organizations and individuals, broad community support have been the backbone of this effort from the very beginning, to this moment. Many friends and donors have helped us build this organization and to nurture these impressive scholars. I had a couple guys say to me tonight, "It's very expensive to be your friend." Well, I acknowledge that to be true. But the only answer I can give, if you sat there and listened to Brady and Jessica, don't bother with me or Greg. You sat there and listened to them, you know it's worth the effort, and it's a great cause. Your support has been the primary ingredient in our success to date. A stronger future for Maine requires stronger assistance from those who can help. We need you, our scholars need you. And so we ask you to continue your support, fill out a pledge card, win a trip to Italy or Spain or wherever it is you feel like going. And I also want to say another thing. Although these scholars take this scholarship with no strings attached, they have no legal or moral obligation to us. I do, when I meet with them each August, ask them to consider paying back what they received so that others behind can have the same opportunity. And although most of them are still young, we raised in this last campaign $28,000 from some of our alumni, most in small amounts. One of them came from a young woman, Kay Porter, who's working as a guidance counselor in Dubai. And they came from all over the world to help us, and it's truly inspiring to me because in addition to their words, they're providing their resources. These young scholars have been and will be an important part of my life. And I hope that as each of you leaves here tonight, you will recall the helping hands that you received in life. And think about where you might be if you didn't have the support of your family or a special teacher, or perhaps for some of you, even a scholarship. And I hope you'll leave with a feeling in your heart that matches the feeling I had. I can help these kids. I must help these kids. We are all of us so very fortunate to be Americans, citizens of what is, despite its many imperfections, still the most open, the most just, the most free society in all of human history. And our good fortune is multiplied many times over because the vast majority of us here in the room are in a position to help these young people and others like them so that they can lead lives more full, more meaningful, more productive, more beneficial to the society as a whole, and in a virtuous and continuing circle, they can then do what we're doing now, that's helping others, the greatest gift of all. May God bless the United States of America. Thank you all very much for what you've done here this evening. Thank you. Each year, Mary gives me the opportunity to make one friend and 300 enemies.
Here it goes again.
Thank you
All
very
right.
much. Can we get my brother Johnny up here to do this? Is he up here? Yeah, my brother Johnny likes attention. He used to get a lot of it, but he doesn't get much anymore. And so I like to occasionally let the spotlight, come on up, Swish, come on up. Yeah.
Johnny? Here you go.
Can I? Mary, hold on a second.
I got
Let me tell one other story. I'm often asked, what was the greatest moment of my life? And the answer I give is it was election night, my first time running for the Senate. I was way behind in the polls, was given no chance to win. I was lucky enough to win. On election night, at a ballroom in a hotel here in Portland, when I went to give my victory speech, the podium was jammed with people, and I had to fight my way up to get to the microphone, and who did I find there but my brother, the Swisher. Everybody knows he's the greatest basketball player in Maine's history. Everybody knows that I was the worst basketball player in Maine history. So I spent much of my life in his shadow. In fact, as a kid in Waterville, I was known as Johnny Mitchell's kid brother, the one who isn't any good. So that night, when I get up there, he draped himself over me. The cameras were clicking and so forth. And the next day in the Portland paper, there was a big picture on the front page of me trying to give a speech, Johnny hanging on to me. And the caption read, Senator George Mitchell celebrating his upset election victory, being cheered on by an unidentified supporter. Here is the unidentified supporter to make the winning choice tonight.
Thank you, George. The only good thing about a hearing aid is that I turned them off. I'd love to pick mine out. Jesus Christ, I'd love to. Here you go, Judge.
All right. Gail Keyser, Brunswick, Maine. Where's Gail? Come on up. Come on up there, Gail. Where's Gail? Come on up, Gail. The real prize is to get your picture taken with the Swisher, and then the trip comes second. Johnny, wait, let her have a picture taken with you.
Come on up, Gail.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Thanks very much for your picture. Yeah, there's the photographer. There you are.
Now we're
There you
serious
are.
here.
That's it. You can take it now.